So as Jake said, I'm David Hanna. I'm a chairholder for the UNESCO Chair in Water Science at the University of Birmingham. We also have the UNESCO UniTwin network in eco-hydrological interfaces, which I co-lead with Stefan Kraus, and we coordinate from the University of Birmingham. So it's a real privilege to join you this week to celebrate 50 years of the Intergovernmental Hydrology Programme and also 60 years of UNESCO's unwavering and the UN's commitment towards water science. And this is really a milestone, not only to commemorate the achievements to date, but also to look forward and think about what we must do next. And as remarked on by all the speakers this morning, the integration of AI into hydrology is going to be transformative in terms of how we monitor, in terms of how we analyze, and in terms of how we manage water-related systems. And AI is evolving very rapidly and significant future promise. So in this presentation, what I'm going to do is to talk about our Smart Water project, talking about specifically about how we can use AI for water quality management, but I will throw one example in from water quantity. What I'm going to do is to start off just by outlining why water quality, particularly river water quality, is important and why we have a river water quality crisis and how we might move from that crisis to more sustainable solutions. I'll then move on to showcase some of the work we've done at the University of Birmingham across 4 different areas of our current research and conclude by considering some future prospects for AI and water quality. So unlike floods and droughts, river water pollution is often regarded as the invisible water crisis, but issues of water quality remain highly persistent. In Europe, 34% of the 130,000 rivers that have been analysed are of poor ecological status, and a third of rivers in the United States are the same. We identified the fact that global river water pollution is very much related to the intertwined interactions between human development and also governance across 3 phases. We identified a first phase of water quality, which relates to organic pollution and also pathogens in the system. Then we identified a second wave of river water pollution, which relates to primary and secondary industry. And thirdly, a phase associated with novel contaminants and emerging pollutions, things like microplastics and pharmaceuticals in the environment. Upper income countries have the highest capacity to be able to detect and prevent and indeed remove these pollutants, but they're still struggling with phases 2 and 3. In addition to polluting rivers directly, we also have an international trade in pollution and an increase in pollution in urbanized environments and in relation to other global pressures. And very notably, in lower and middle income countries, we have all of these phases of pollution occurring at the one time and overlapping, causing a real water quality crisis. So we need to look to solutions that are proactive and appropriate and don't lead to water quality and new legacy pollutants into the future. So how do we move from a crisis to a solution? Well, firstly, we need to recognize when we're dealing with water quality issues that we're dealing with very complex challenges that needed to be managed in an integrated and an interconnected way. We need to also recognize that we need to improve our understanding of both acute but also chronic toxicity of not just individual chemicals, but multi-contaminant cocktails. And we need to think about this in the context of the fact that when we're dealing with water quality and water quality management, we're dealing with complex processes and also very patchy data. So in this context, our traditional approaches, both in terms of process-based and statistical models, don't really capture this complexity, but we do have some opportunities around novel sensing, new methods of analysis, and also community engagement to take things forward. So as you can see on this diagram here, we have an opportunity associated with big data and machine learning, new sensor technologies, open research approaches, and these together can help us to improve our observations, our modeling frameworks, and ultimately policy. So in this context, what I'm going to do in this presentation is to explore 4 applications for AI for use in sustainable water quality management. I'm going to start off by looking at observations, then move over to approaches that focus on thinking about how we can understand patterns and controls, talk a little about hybrid modeling, and then move on to talk about some responsible approaches to AI, which move beyond water science. Finally, I'll draw everything together for the session by looking at some sort of future prospects for AI and how we can move from this invisible water crisis of river water pollution towards more sustainable solutions. And just to sort of reinforce the importance of this work, The plot you've got on the bottom from the World Bank shows that there are still 2 million people dying every year from water quality problems. And our research published in Nature Sustainability during the pandemic showed that 40% of people couldn't wash their hands the day before, which of course is incredibly important in combating issues around sanitation and health. So I'm going to start by looking at aspects around observations and the benefits here of AI approaches. So AI can be used to help us design better sensor networks by combining historical data-driven design, by pulling in information from communities and allowing us to optimize placement. This allows us to maximize coverage of river basins in terms of gaining informative data, but to minimize redundancy in terms of the placement of sensors. It also allows us to adapt our sampling frameworks to cover the terrain and ultimately to reduce costs. Focusing on the sensors themselves, and you can see on the bottom, we've got examples of some of our high-end sensors and some low-cost sensors developed in collaboration with UNESCO and the WMO. We can develop sensors with AI on board for real-time feedback, but also for predictive maintenance to check we're collecting high-quality data. And then working across our different sensors, we can integrate data between multiple parameters, use Internet of Things approaches for smart sensors, incorporate spatially distributed imagery such as that from drones, as well as indigenous knowledge and historical data to give us a blended data set. We can then process our data to do things like imputation, so looking about missing and corrupt data, to use AI for gap filling, for resampling, and for anomaly detection and trend analysis. We've also been embedding some AI tools within some of the early warning systems that we've been developing. We've been applying these approaches in terms of monitoring and the use of AI in our Birmingham Urban River Observatory, which was designated as a UNESCO IHP ecohydrology demonstration site earlier this year, the first in England. It's based in the Upper River Tame Basin in the city of Birmingham, which is a highly urbanized catchment with some real water pollution problems. There, we're working on using our sensor networks to identify hotspots and hot moments in water pollution. As the previous speaker mentioned, we're gaining the benefits there of high-frequency sensing and also modeling across nested spatial scales. But importantly, we're pulling these high-frequency observations in with citizen science observations and also other forms of public engagement to make sure that we use that evidence and that knowledge to co-create nature-based solutions for improved water quality management. Moving on from observations to think about trying to understand some of the processes and controls, we've been doing quite a lot of work in terms of water quality on river water temperature. River water temperature is really important for all the physical, chemical, and biological processes within river systems. But we need to rethink how we consider water temperature for a human-dominated world. We can't just think about it in natural catchments, but also to think about how it varies and what the controls are in landscapes in which humans are the key driver. So we've been working and using machine learning approaches, particularly random forests, to unravel some of the controls on river water temperature across the United States and indeed elsewhere. And just to flag here, this was work done on one of the open source and long-term data sets. We're able to use machine learning models here to predict maximum monthly river temperature, but also to predict river temperature sensitivity. And using the random forest models, we showed that air temperature was a really significant control, but river water temperature was very much modified by the catchment characteristics, notably elevation, the occurrence of forests, and stream flow variability. We're all able to identify those areas that were most sensitive to river temperature change associated with arid and semi-arid environments, and showed that catchments in which we had urbanization and dam regulation were some of those that experienced the most altered thermal regimes and also those with the most notable thermal shocks. So we've also, as well as working on using machine learning models in more of a statistical sense, we've been thinking about developing techniques to blend frameworks for machine learning with process-based modeling. I think it's fair to say that a lot of machine learning and process-based modeling have been evolving in parallel, but there's real benefits of hybridizing and co-evolving these approaches together, because that would allow us to enhance some of the aspects of scientific discovery and also policy support because we can bridge the gap between the data-driven insights we get from machine learning with the more mechanistic understanding that we gain from process-based models. And I think this synergy between process-based understanding and some of the computational aspects is where we're going to get the real synergies and advantages from bringing AI into hydrological science. So we've been applying blended models of machine learning and process-based models to look at river runoff across 290 catchments within the UK. So what this work has done is compared 4 different approaches to modeling stream flow using HBV, which is a physically based catchment hydrological model, with LSTM, a machine learning model, long-term, short-term memory model, a model which blends both the physically based model and the machine learning model, and then a model that does that but adds in hydrological signatures. And what we found from this research is that actually the process-based model did quite well in areas that were natural, didn't have much human influence. And as you might expect, the machine learning model did very well in areas where we had rich data. What we did find is when we blended those together, we had an improvement in machine learning models in areas for which we could pull in some of the process-based understanding. And we had areas where we had data poor, but good process representation. We were able to pull in the machine learning tools to enhance our projections there. It's also important that we don't just think about the opportunities around machine learning for hydrological science purely in the context of hydrological and hydrological science. So we published a paper just a couple of months ago, actually in the context of disaster risk management, which focused upon thinking about some of the key principles for responsible AI, which covered not just environmental science, but aspects of law and social science. It identified 5 principles we need for more responsible AI around safety, security, and robustness, around transparency and explainability, around fairness, but also around accountability and governance, as well as contestability and redress. On top of this, we need to think about what we would call human-centered design, in that we will be making models for what purpose. We also need to consider this in the current geopolitical context in terms of law and governance and regulations and moves towards sovereign AI. Think about ethics. And as was mentioned by some of the speakers earlier, we need to think about the environmental footprint of the use of AI, because 10 AI searches that you might use are the equivalent of using, in terms of cooling, half a litre of water, or driving a car in terms of carbon equivalents if it's petrol driven for 1 kilometre. And we also need to be mindful of what we're using AI for. So to conclude and to wrap up with some considerations and future directions for AI for water quality. So in this presentation, I think we've shown that AI can be really informative in terms of developing sampling designs and integrating different types of data within our sampling frameworks. It can also help to reveal patterns and observations and bridge space-time gaps. And in some cases, it can outperform traditional modeling approaches, particularly where we have sparse and noisy data. It can reveal and identify some of the key controls and drivers on water quality dynamics. However, we need to recognize that AI models by their nature can be somewhat opaque or black box, which may make interpretation difficult and indeed trust challenging. And it goes without saying, given their nature, AI models do require large data sets, and as a consequence, so we have limited data, may not be well generalizable without validation. We need to consider the limits of AI in terms of the applications going beyond those observations which we observe. Need to think about them very carefully in longer term forecasting and projection. I would suggest that hybrid models have opportunities for increasing not just our ability to predict, but our ability to understand. But we really need interdisciplinary collaboration. We need open data. We need to empower communities, and we need to work with decision makers to realize the opportunities. And here, this is where I think the IHP is particularly strong, in that it's all about collaboration, open data, working with a diverse range of communities for real change. Thank you.